Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. Welcome to Night Talk. I'm your guest host this evening, and we're talking about something that I think you, as most people, are very concerned about, namely your money, your livelihood, your job, your mortgage, your home. How do you put food on the table, and how do you stay in that home? And to discuss this issue that is on the tops of the tongues and in the front of the mind of basically all Americans, including those of us who live here in southwestern Pennsylvania, who have seen some pretty hard times before this, I brought together the best panel that I could imagine to hit the different angles on this issue and to maybe bring a little bit of wisdom and a little clarity to cut through the noise and the fear and the confusion. Let's start off with my buddy, the American entrepreneur, Ron Morris, a serial entrepreneur, the founder of Duquesne University Center for Entrepreneurial Study, the director of that, and his current venture, well, a number of ventures, but probably most high-profile venture is Pittsburgh Business Radio, WMNY. Ron, welcome to the program.
And thank you for the plug. You're welcome, Jer.
1360 on your AM dial.
Yes,
right?
every day now.
Every day now, every day, plugging away at it.
Right.
And the timing is exquisite. This is a time, you know, I know you and I talked a long time about business talk radio, and you went through a long process of getting there, but you got there at exactly the right moment, at least in terms of the needs of the people, to understand how this thing works, how economics and finance and entrepreneurship works.
That's right, yeah. We launched 9/15, which in future years will be the 9/11 of the financial era, but that was our first day on the air. It's good and it's bad. I mean, it's bad in that the economy went south, but it's good in that everybody is tuning in, we hope, trying to learn more about the world of business. We are trying to make a complicated subject interesting and simple, and so far so good.
Father Jay Geisler is the pastor, the rector of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in McKeesport, and has served previously in a church in Ambridge, Pennsylvania, just at the time that steel collapsed. And then he ends up in McKeesport, where you have similar economic trouble. So Father Jay, I think, maybe has as great a sense of the human cost and the sort of the emotional stages of economic dislocation as anyone I know, and I'm glad to have you here, Father Jay.
It's an honor to be here.
And by the way, I should also point out, since we're into cross-promotion here, he's on Ron Morris's station, WMNY, as is the gentleman to my right, stage left, Mark Laskow, CEO of Greycourt & Company, which is a financial advisory firm, a full-service financial advisory firm focusing on high-end clients. And when I thought, who can I bring here who has really the brain power, the horsepower on financial matters, you're the guy who came immediately to mind, and I'm glad you could make it this evening.
That's because you haven't met my partners yet. I always tell people that they're all smarter than I am, but thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So 1+ hiring. I like that. You always hire people smarter than yourself.
It's easy in my case.
And me too, and I also marry smarter than myself too. That always helps as well. All right, let's get into this. People are terrified. I can't remember fear like this in my lifetime, nationally. I think people who were in Pittsburgh in the 80s when steel collapsed, they can get a sense of that regionally. But I cannot think of any time in history, in my personal history. I mean, certainly you can read about the Panic of 1837 or the Great Depression of the 1930s, but the emotional trauma here is intense. And I'm just going to make this a jump ball. Is that rational, or is it irrational? Are they being silly? What do you say to people who are afraid right now? Anyone?
I think you've got to respect their feelings and say that that's a reasonable response. It may not be functional. You can't wallow in it, but as a first reaction to what's going on, yes, you're afraid. But that's partly a function of the fact that we've led a relatively charmed economic life during our lifetimes. We haven't had these tremendous drawdowns that were commonplace in economic life of the world up until this really World War II. And we are not as used to this, and frankly, not as tough as a lot of our forebears were.
And that's what I'd go to, Jer. A little fear is a good thing, I think. I think we have gotten soft as a country, as a society. I know that. I hate to use the term thinning of the herd because we've all been thinned. I don't think there's anybody that hasn't lost 30, 40% of their portfolio. But if this has the net effect of making the country leaner and meaner, maybe the timing is just right for that, because I personally, as one who's started a number of companies, do feel a little, not anger, but it frustrates me that we've, as a society, had grown close to getting used to having things handed, having things given. Hard work seems to have gone away a little bit in the last decade or two. So I'm kind of, in a way, I'm not happy about this, but believe me.
No, but you're looking for the kind of the mustard seed in this. You're saying what good can come out of this adversity. There's
never anything wrong with a tightening of the belt, thinning of the herd, whatever you want to call it. I've seen corporations shed 10-20% of their workforce, and guess what? They didn't miss a beat.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. What's that tell you?
That they were fat, dumb, and happy beforehand.
Right.
Yeah. Although that is tough if you're one of the 10 or 20%, which is the big story.
Oh, well, let's talk about the 10 and the 20%, or the 50, 60, 70%. Jay, you saw this. In many ways, I think that Pittsburgh is blessed in the sense that we had trauma like this before and learned from it, and therefore have something to teach the world about how to deal with this location. Ron said, you know, Mark talked about fear, and Ron talked about anger, and these are stages, basically, right? Denial, anger, bargaining. Talk to me about what happens, Jay, to a community. You were in a community that was hit hard by the collapse of steel. Talk to me about what happens sort of culturally, socially, family, spiritually, when you have real economic tough times.
Well, I think two things. One is we have the bigger picture here that, you know, we're focusing on the economics, but this decade has been unprecedented. You know, we had that internet meltdown in the spring of 2000, then the hanging Chad. For the first time, the presidency was decided basically by the court system. 9/11, war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, and then you come to this. So it's a combination of a number of things that are all coming together at once. And what happens is the first response is to panic. And, you know, in the old days, they used to call them, instead of recessions, they would call them panic.
Panics, right.
And I think part of it is because we have had such an economic juggernaut. And in some sense, we put our faith there. You know, we looked at different areas, but this is a place that we were always getting a return, and then all of a sudden, boom, we've hit a wall. And the first response for people is to panic. And I saw that down in, in the Beaver Valley when the mills were closing. And one of the most important things there is I saw how people got through it is they really looked at the established structures that they had taken for granted. Church and a family.
Right.
And, you know, how did we get through it? Relatives helping out one another, churches helping out one another, the nonprofits. But, I mean, the first tendency is just to go into panic, or the other is to go into denial. They seem to be the...
They're going to hire us back. Right, I mean, the steel companies are going to hire us back.
Oh, yes,
they're going to come back if we protest enough. If we call our congressmen, they can't do this to us. We're going to be able to bring the jobs back.
Yes.
And there are people now, 30 years later, who are still in that phase.
Well, sometimes in McKeesport, I wonder about that.
Right.
The mills are sitting there, and they're waiting for industry to come back. And as a matter of fact, there's trees growing in a couple of the places where they had. They just weren't able to shed that idea. I mean, that was like a stability. You know, stability was the steel industry, and it's been the economy. And then all of a sudden, their worldview.
So church and family were optional, and job was the essential.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Okay. And then when you lose job, then that becomes optional, and now you start to look at what's really essential.
Right. Family, community, church, temple, synagogue. You look at these other elements that haven't been shaken in the midst of it. Because actually, especially when people are laid off, I mean, you may have relatives moving in. There's all kind of things that can happen in this. We saw it. I mean, people had to go and launch out. I mean, why are there Steeler bars all over the United States? It's because our young people had to adapt.
And they left.
Yes, they
did.
Yes,
we didn't export steel. We exported steel workers. All right. There's one thing I'd like you to think about. We can come back after the break, Jay, and that is who makes it through. If you think about the person who reacts with panic and fear, who makes it through, who did make it through those traumas? And I want to come back to that in just a moment, but we're going to come back to that. And I also want to put out on the table when we come back kind of what this is, because there's this great big furry monster called the recession, the depression. I think that's going too far. The crisis. What is it exactly?